So let's start with biogeography. With the beginning of the era of explorations, naturalists joined cartographers and other explorers around the Earth and discovered, for example, that large flightless walking birds such as emu from Australia or rhea from South America and ostrich from Africa are very similar. So they speculated, are they related? Or they just adapted to the same steppe grasslands in these three different southern continents. It turns out that something that those cartographers and explorers at the time didn't realize, those three southern continents, so South America, Africa, and Australia, together with also India and even Antarctica, were part of a much larger southern continent called Gondwana, or Gondwana land. We'll go to a map of that in a moment. So now we know that these birds are actually related to each other. But if we look at these two plants at the bottom, so a cactus here on your left and a euphorbia. So even though this plant from southern Africa, it's called milkweed barrel cactus, it's not a cactus. And now we know that all the cacti inhabit only the Americas, North America and South America. So cacti, the family of Cactaceae, has evolved probably only after the inception of the Atlantic that separated Africa from South America. So they are not related, even though they are both flowering plants, so they have that common descent, or common ancestor, excuse me. They're actually from two different families, and their adaptations are different. So this is an example of convergence to adaptation to the same dry habitat. So speak about supercontinents such as Gondwana or Gondwanaland and Pangaea. Now we know that about 500 million years ago, the southern landmass formed Gondwana. And then sometime later, Pangaea was formed. That literally means all earth. Gaia or Gaia was the mother earth in Greek, and Pan means all. So Pangaea is only about 270, so less than 300 million years old. When Gondwana land, it's 500 million years old. So let's take a look at this map just from your textbook. So here in yellow, you can see the Gondwana land about 500 million years ago. And then you can see Pangaea, that includes North America and Eurasia right here. And then now we can see how they differentiated today. So this is before 180 million years ago, when the Atlantic divided South America from Africa. And they keep on moving away from each other at a rate about 2 centimeters plus a year. So the Atlantic keeps on expanding, while probably the Pacific keeps on getting smaller. So land masses themselves were not static, so they moved around. And please click on this link, and there are several other links, and your textbook has different ways of thinking about this continental mass drift and shifts and bumping into each other and separating from each other, which led to species evolution. Adapting, either coming from a common descent from Gondwana land, like those three large walking flightless birds, versus the two plants that I showed you, one from the Americas and the other one from Africa, that look alike, but they only look alike because they responded to the same environmental pressures, not because they are from the same group. So moving on to the next next area of naturalists' explorations um, that led us to our thoughts of evolution. The next one to consider is comparative morphology, and in this case, we can even look to comparative anatomy. So what you see here, again, straight from your textbook, you can see a human skeleton versus a snake skeleton. So right away you can see that we have way fewer vertebrae and way fewer ribs, but we still have a tailbone. So even though most humans are not born with a tail, and when they are, it's removed really early on, we do have this vestige. So the example here refers to vestigial or ancient structures that are no use anymore. So Lamarck was right in this perspective: what you don't use, you lose. So comparative to more primitive, so earlier species such as monkeys that could use a tail for balance, we don't need it. So we do have a coccyx, which literally means a tailbone, but it's vestigial. And the same thing here, you can see the skeleton of a boa constrictor, so a very large snake, that even though it doesn't have legs, it does have remnants of legs, at least in its skeleton. So look into this idea of vestigial structures, and from the study of embryology, you can look into other structures that human embryos have throughout our ontogeny, that it's considered to be a quick summary of phylogeny. So what are these big words mean? What is ontogeny versus what is phylogeny? And what are some examples of vestigial characteristics that we might still have? And are these vestigial traits or vestigial structures just useless and can only lead to infection and surgery and potential death, such as the appendix, which is considered a vestigial structure? Or some of them gain new value, they gain new functions. So take a look into this idea of vestigial characteristics. So moving on to the next area of naturalist explorations, geology was crucial into understanding evolution. And besides the fact that geologists realized that if you go at a relatively same depth in different areas of the earth, you will find similar types of rock. And while digging for this similar type of rock, geologists and archaeologists and paleontologists have discovered fossils. And as I mentioned before, fossa in Greek means whole. So these are remnants preserved, either a whole skeleton, in the case of this 200 million years old ichthyosaurus, or literally fish lizard, or just impressions in rocks of organic structures that preceded this impression, this fossil. So this is a fossil of a leaf that was labeled Glossopteris, and the name, it's relatively simple. Glossa means tongue in Greek. That's why we still have the word glossary, which is a mini dictionary at the end of most books, including your textbook. So check it out whenever you have a question about the origin of a word or what does that word mean. Pteros means wing. So the shape of this leaf could look like a tongue, but because of the veins, so the midrib and then the lateral veins of this leaf could look like a feather as well, hence the name Glossopteris. But speak about fossils, because of the study of fossils and paleontology, now we know that, believe it or not, whales are having their own evolutionary origin and a common ancestor on land. So this is a fossil that it's probably related to a group of four-legged or tetrapods that includes hippopotamus, but also pigs, deer, sheep, cows, and whales. So if you look at the name, again in Greek, hippopotamus literally means river horse, because they do, so they are large herbivores that are actually submerged in water for a long period of their time. So that makes the connection in between them and all the way to whales. But further than that, there were fossils, like this 37 million years ago fossil found in Egypt that has a very far along reduced forelimbs and almost completely disappeared back legs. There was another fossil that linked whales to this archaeodactyl group of two-hooved tetrapods that was found to have been lived about 47 million years ago in today's Pakistan. So fossils are giving us a clue of previous life. First of all, it tells us that indeed species exist and disappear, and it gives us links to connect such species like hippopotamus to whales, which if you look at them today, you wouldn't necessarily come up with that conclusion. But what exactly maybe led these large animals to go to water, or were they large before? Were they as large? Probably they're not as large, and they weren't. And like all animals, they were probably searching for food, and probably water and sea life offered more food resources. And at the beginning, they were going in water to hunt, and then they were coming back to land and reproducing. But then the more they explore, the more they adapted to water, and the more they eventually didn't really need to come on land, even for reproduction. They still need to come above water to breathe, as we very well know.